very pleased to see you and to be joined, as usual, by my good friend Rachel Davidson. Both of us are international best-selling authors, and I'm the founder member of the Genuinely You Limited company, and all of that encompasses. I've avoided talking about this topic for a while, but it's been one of those things that's been bubbling in the background.
It's a tough one.
Abuse is one of those things that many people avoid speaking about, and yet it's something that exists, and probably in bigger numbers than we would like to think that's the case. The Me Too campaign, which started off in America in Los Angeles, I think has done a lot of people a favour in the sense that it's given them the courage and the permission to talk about the fact that they've been abused. And I've assumed, and I may be wrong, but that's why I've had a spate of clients who have come to me because in their childhoods they've been sexually abused. And I have to say most commonly abused by people who they should be able to trust to nurture and look after them.
That's what the statistics say, isn't it?
Well, the statistics are, I think, something like 80% of people who are abused sexually in their childhood, it's from a family member or a very, very close friend.
Yeah.
And it's one of those subjects that lots of people find very, very difficult to talk about, particularly if they've been the victim to it.
Yes.
But in that holding on to the hurt and all of the negative feelings that come with having been abused in that way, what I've recognised is actually you don't have to stay stuck with all of the damage that the abuse apparently creates. The recognising that there is a way forward, that you can actually not only survive the abuse, but actually use that experience in order to move forward and to help yourself and, if you choose to, other people. But it's a really tricky thing to talk about because one of the things I want to make very, very clear from the outset, in no way do I want to trivialise this.
No.
It is very, very serious, and for the people who are on the receiving end, it is significant and it is awful.
And it's quite interesting, isn't it, the sort of being the survivor of abuse. I was reading, actually the book was in my mind of late, Lost Connections, which you and I have both talked about in the past, by Johann Hari. And he talks about the start of his depression, and he manages to finally peel back the onion layers and remember.
Yes.
I was going to say discover, but it is a remembrance of the point at which he really started to use depression as a protection, or as, no, that's wrong. The depression is his soul knocking on his consciousness to say, you suffered, you're suffering, you need to do something. But he tracks it back to where it started, which was he was subjected to about 2 or 3 instances of very violent, aggressive behaviour by an adult that he should have been able to trust. And he talks about how he had turned that in on himself because he said to himself, well, I was responsible for that. I must have been responsible for that in some way, which I think is
it's really, really common.
And he talks then about how, okay, so if I was responsible for it in some way, then I then deserved it, and that's how. He says how useful it was in the moment, because it sort of helped him stay safe in the moment, but how continuing to think about that, continuing to have that mindset, then over time becomes more and more destructive, and that's where his depression really kicks off.
Yes.
And it's interesting, isn't it, to go back and examine a victim's, I hesitate even from using the word victim because I know that can be triggering, but somebody who has been on the end of something that doesn't feel great, let's put it like that. It's interesting, the psychology, the words, the justifications, the sort of the corners that will get you backed into?
Well, certainly, before we go any further, I think it's really important that we make a distinction. And at one level, there probably is less of a distinction, but let's make the distinction between sexual abuse, physical abuse in the sense of violence, and emotional abuse.
Yes.
None of them are acceptable, and all of them leave significant scars that need to be dealt with. And I'm not making a value judgment about which is better or worse. They are all unacceptable, and they all create significant damage unless they're dealt with.
Yeah.
And very often people don't deal with them until much later in their lives, because the very perpetrators of the abuse very often use control, guilt. You know, if you tell anybody, then I'll hurt another member of the family. If you tell anybody, then I'll go to prison. If you tell anybody, they'll think that you're dirty. You know, there's a whole range of control that's put in place that keeps the victim feeling that they are powerless. And I want to make the distinction, because we often talk about, you know, it's your choice whether you're a victim or a hero. And I think we're talking about adults. But abuse often starts when people are very small. And I've had, as I say, a number of cases over the years, a lot of cases, but particularly in this year, I've had a significant number more cases where the abuse has started when people are as young as 3. And in that situation, I think it's the nature of the word victim means that you are actually powerless, that somebody who's bigger than you, who you trust, who has the capacity to put in place arguments which to a very young child or even to a vulnerable person feel that that's the case. They become the reality because they're believed. Then you are in true victim mode. Very often the person is physically much stronger, and that there is little that one can do about it when you are in that situation. And I think this is probably true of people who are in situations of rape as well, where they feel absolutely powerless and voiceless. They cannot, they can't vocalize what the problem is. That's then compounded as they get older, when they recognize that actually they go and visit somebody else and they see a loving family, and they recognize that what they've been experiencing, which they had assumed was the norm, is not. And then we have this layering. I can't tell anybody because they won't believe me, or I can't tell anybody because then the family will be split up and it could be my fault. Or I can't tell anybody because then I'll put myself or other people in danger. And that abuse, physical, is then compounded by the emotional abuse, which keeps people absolutely stuck.
Well, the Me Too started, of course, with Hollywood and powerful men, generally speaking, taking advantage of their power, and the threat against the women that were being abused. And it was, again, mostly women in terms of what my knowledge of the media coverage was, is the threat of taking away your livelihood. You know, these are people who want very much...
And your chance of ongoing success.
Yeah.
I just want to, before we go any further, women can be abusers too.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly emotional and physical abusers. And, you know, it's no less damaging. And I think we need to make this clear, that abusers can come in all shapes and sizes, all ages, and in all walks of life. This is not something that is specific to any group of people. But you're right, that in that situation, you know, film moguls who use their power to say, I can make your career if you do what I want, or I can destroy your career if you don't. And, you know, whether you're 3 or 13 or 23, or 43, if you are on the receiving end of abuse, one of the very core things is you feel powerless. Working with people who've been abused, for me, there's a number of things that become really important. And the first is that there is a safe, non-judgmental space for that person to be heard, to be seen, to be validated. And for many of the people that I have worked with, it's the first time they've spoken about it. And we're talking about, people who, it's not, sometimes people will disclose when they're, soon after it's happened. Many people, it's in their teens that they'll disclose when they start to recognise that this isn't right. But just as often, it's people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and people who have held on to this for decades, and it's eroded if ever they were ever able to develop a sense of self-worth. If I was worth something, people wouldn't do this. If I was worth something, I would have been able to stop this. I'd have been able to turn this round. And so being heard, seen, and validated in an absolutely safe space with somebody who cares, who's not going to go into the "oh, poor you," because I think sympathy can be destructive in these situations. Empathetic, yes, but then is able to say, but do you recognise that despite all of the horror, you've survived?
What about the other subtlety, which is that the victim doesn't actually think of themselves as a victim of abuse?
Well, I think that's probably less common when people come forward and ask for help.
Sure, but often the ask for help is about something else that's sort of...
something else has triggered it.
And then you can track it back to the fact that actually it's because they have this mindset where, they think it's acceptable for people to behave in a certain way towards them. Well, that tracks back to
self-worth.
So,
I deserve this. I wasn't good enough. I don't deserve better. I think so much comes back to people's sense of self-worth, and recognising that actually you've survived, I think is a useful starting point. It's, this is multi-layered, and it's really important that within this conversation, I don't trivialise the work that people have to put in themselves, even with all of the help and support. You can't do the work for them.
Yeah.
They have to be ready to open up, to trust. For many of the people who've been abused, that is a huge step forward, to actually trust that they're going to be listened to. And in my experience, many people have actually attempted before to tell somebody, and they've not listened, or they have dismissed it as, oh, it's your imagination, or it's not that bad, because they don't want to face the reality, because it's too shocking, it's too difficult.
But I think
that's almost another level of abuse, if I may say so.
Well, yeah. And it's sort of an unfortunate one, but an understandable one too, because we'd all like to live in a world where there wasn't such a thing as going on.
Absolutely. And particularly if you tell another family member, they've then got to take on board that somebody that may have no idea that this is going on. They've then got to either trivialise it or ignore it, or they've got to do something about it. And of course, doing something about it feels monumental, because indeed it may split the family up, and it's a really challenging situation. And I think it's important that we acknowledge how challenging it is. But once people do feel brave enough to come forward, you recognise that when they're holding on to this, the equivalent of holding on to a lead-filled portmanteau that you have to drag around with you all the time. And if you really want freedom from all of the baggage that abuse creates, then a big part of that, in my experience of working with people, is recognising that actually it's happened, and that you were in a position where you were unable to do something about that. But actually you can do something about it now. And that is that the ultimate thing for you to do is to forgive the perpetrator now. that comes with huge, huge issues in itself. But
you must get a lot of people when you put forward this idea of forgiveness who react extremely strongly against that.
And yes, initially. But when you then talk about, let's be really clear, forgiveness is not about condoning what went on. Absolutely not. It's not about forgetting, but you holding on to the hurt, the anger, the bitterness, the not being able to trust anybody. That does hurt the perpetrator. They're oblivious to it. But what it does, when you are truly able to forgive, then you cut the strings to the portmanteau, and you don't have to carry it around anymore.
But what about revenge?
Well, it's an interesting one. But I think when you go into the whole issue of wanting revenge, very often that's not possible, because by the time somebody's come to take action, the perpetrator is old or they are dead. And you're still, as the person who's been abused, you're still holding on to all of that baggage. Revenge, in a way, the best revenge, I think, is for you to be able to take control of your life, to be strong, to actually make what awful thing has happened to you, take that terrible thing and create a positivity out of it, which is, I am not diminished. I am strong. And my experience of most of the people that I've worked with who have been abused is, they found a way in their lives to help other people. And that they are incredibly empathetic, and they have a huge heart for others. What we work on is having that same love, that same connection with themselves. And they can do that in spades once they go through the forgiveness process. And it is a process. It's not, click your fingers and it's all done.
No.
They also have to, many of them, forgive themselves, because they hold on to, but I should have done something about it. I shouldn't have let it happen. When the reality is,
I must have asked for it in some way. I must have been responsible.
When the reality is, the only person who is actually responsible for it is the perpetrator. And that by forgiving the perpetrator, you free yourself. When you hold on to all of that hurt, it's like giving yourself the poison and expecting the other person to die. And we've done a program around forgiveness, but we've not been very specific. And when you're talking about abuse, this has to be handled and very carefully. People need to be supported. They need to go at their own pace. And if you're listening to this, or if you know of somebody who has gone through abuse, urge them to get help. It is really difficult to do this for yourself, because it's enormous. For many people, it's, I'm an abuse victim has become their identity. That's who I am. They can't get past it. Whatever's going on in life, I don't really deserve it because of what happened to me. And there is light at the end of the tunnel if you choose to seek it. There is a way of turning this terrible experience into something which is part of you. Of course it is, but not one that defines you or holds you back, stops you trusting, stops you loving, stops you being in a position where other people are able to love you. It's quite understandable, isn't it, that you are reluctant to trust anybody, to love anybody, or allow anybody to love you, if the people that you've expected to be loving and care for you and nurture you have been the very ones who have turned on you. But it is possible. And life becomes very different. Instead of this past defining your present and your future, you then have the choice of what present do you want? What quality of life do you want? How do you want life to move forward? What sort of future do you want? that becomes very actively your choice.
Mm.
But while you stay stuck in, I've been abused, I have no worth, there must be something at fault with me, that keeps you stuck very firmly in the past. And you may, have the trappings of a present and a future, but it's a shadow of the potential it could be.
Mm.
And I think for me, the thing that really resonates when I work with people is watching them emerge. You think of a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis. It's not a mean feat, is it? The chrysalis, the butterfly struggles, and it looks as if it's, potentially very painful. But actually, when the struggle is over and they emerge, there's something very beautiful emerges out of it.
Mm.
And for me, watching people work on their demons that have been created through the abuse and actually being able to lay those demons to rest, this beautiful butterfly emerges that is not only beautiful but strong. And some butterflies can fly thousands of miles, can't they?
But some people might hear that, some people have really, really suffered at the hands of another human. And they might hear that sort of, these things are sent to test us, and what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and all of these things, and feel very sort of like angry at the idea that, to be a butterfly, I have to suffer. But I think,
well, no, the suffering's already gone on. It's not about suffering.
Yeah, but I was never going to be a butterfly unless I suffered.
Right.
So
okay.
Again, it's a slightly sort of strange way of thinking about things, but of course we're talking about a strange way of living, having come to this world and being subjected to great pain and anguish and abuse. The thing that in that little metaphor about the butterfly that it sort of changes it from this story that in order anything that's worthwhile is worth suffering for, that kind of mentality, is that actually there is a very practical reason for the struggle of coming out of the chrysalis. It's not just so that beauty can arrive, it's so that beauty has the ability to arrive.
Yes.
The caterpillar has to struggle in order to pump the blood into the wings in order to make the wings unfurl. So if you take that particular creature's struggle away, then you prevent it from
it no longer becomes the butterfly. And perhaps it's a flawed metaphor, but I'm not sure that it is. People who have been through abuse have struggled to this point.
Yes.
But what's interesting is that when you start to work with people to look at, there will be gifts.
Yes.
In all of the horror and the hurt, there are significant gifts, but the gifts only become apparent when you actually make the decision that you are no longer going to stay stuck in the struggle.
Because if you are staying that very angry, why do shitty things have to happen in the world? And this sort of, if there was a God, then why does he allow this to happen? And I was watching a film where a priest basically is being confronted with this by a very angry cop, who obviously does deal with a lot of dirty parts of human nature, and the cop is basically saying, there can't be a God because, and the priest says, okay, so that's the problem of evil, if you like. What about the problem of good? If evil, if it was all just sort of random and meaningless, and the world wasn't meant to have evil, then why does it have good? Why does it have people in the world that all go above and beyond? People like yourself, Mr. Copp, who work really hard to fight back the forces and all this. And that's the point, I think, around trying to get a perspective on terrible stuff that happens to you, is that there will be some learning, there will be some reason. I don't mean to say that you are responsible for this happening, but it will be balanced. There is a sense of if you can name it and understand that it was the person doing it, and that you happened to be there for whatever reason, so you were in their path for whatever reason, then you are more able to understand that there is still good to be had. It doesn't all have to be black. It doesn't have to be fatalism and all this sort of.
No, I think what I would take from that, and my experience of working with people, is that what's interesting is often that people are, what comes across when we first meet is they're almost resigned to what had happened.
Yeah.
The anger often comes out later.
Yeah.
But to start with, that it's been held in this box of resignation, and until they actually open the box and are prepared to do something, that's how they manage to live with it.
Yeah.
That, well, it happened, and it, I was a victim to it, and I, what could I do about it? And yes, you can't change the past, but you absolutely have the opportunity to make a difference to your present and your future if you choose. And for me, it's the actively choosing. And I don't want to be stuck in this place where I live my life and I'm defined by the abuse that went on.
Yes.
Now, interestingly, that many people go on to have very successful professional lives, often helping others. And that side of their life is compartmentalized, and they're successful and they like themselves in that context. It's when the work's not there. It's when those quiet moments, it's when it's the holidays, the weekends, it's when they retire. It's in those moments when they have no distraction, that they are left simply with them, that they are fighting these demons. And for many of them, what they do is they bury the demons deeply in a box. And they are fearful of opening the box, because if I open the box and I let the demon out, I'll never get it back in. And part of the work that we do is to identify what the demons are, and to then make them manageable, to acknowledge the hurt, to acknowledge the anger, the frustration, the terror, to acknowledge it but not to stay stuck in it.
I think there's a great symbolism that if you watch any of the, thinking about that priest story, if you watch anything about demonic possession, and of course you're using it as a metaphor, other people do believe that it happens. Let's just leave it at demons. But in every religion where there is a need to unpossess somebody of whatever, they ask for the demon's name.
Yes.
You have to identify the demon, and you have to name it.
But
and then you use that name against it.
But otherwise it's like fighting fog.
Yes.
Isn't it?
So,
if you can't
the
identify,
acknowledgement is one of the key moments of the beginning of the release, is to name it. And I've heard a couple of people who've suffered quite a lot of abuse, sort of just from public, on the tube or whatever, and a couple of women have sort of written about it and said that the most powerful thing you can do in the moment is name it, is speak aloud what is happening, and get over the embarrassment of that and the fear that people might think you're being ridiculous, but name it. So, you're getting pressed into by a man on the tube who's taking advantage of that. Name it. Speak aloud. Excuse me, why are you? Yeah?
Yeah.
And how in that moment of speaking and naming what is happening, you remove it. And you push it entirely back onto the person who is doing it.
And whilst the example you're giving is in the moment, it's just as important when you're talking about abuse, whether that's as it's happening, a year later, 5 years later, a decade. I've had worked with a number of people who've been in their 60s, who were abused as children, who have never ever spoken of it.
Because the baseline of this is that, these women saying what you should do is name it and all of these other techniques, is that you have to find a an incredible amount of strength within yourself to do that. Even, at the point when it's happening, to name it, at the point 30 years later, to name it, you have to find within yourself that strength.
But the interesting thing for me is, if you have survived the abuse, one of the it's hard to talk about the positives that come out of such a negative experience, but one of the positives that comes out of that is, if you've survived, then inherently you have the strength to do the next step, which is to acknowledge, name, and deal with it. Might not feel like that. And that's why it's really important that you find somebody that you trust, who can hold the space and help you sort that out. And we're coming to the end of this now, and I urge you that if you have suffered abuse, please come forward. If you'd like to work with me, email me through the website, or private message me through Facebook, and know that whatever we talk about will be confidential, and I will be happy to support and help you. You have the opportunity, if you have been abused, that you do not have to stay a victim to it, that you can deal with it and have a present and a future that is free of that heavy lead-filled portmanteau, and that you can actually. The interesting thing about forgiveness is it actually is giving you the freedom to live your life wholly, fully, healthily. So it's a difficult subject, and I recognise that for many people this is going to trigger stuff. All right, please don't sit on it. Reach out and let us help you. So thank you very much for joining us today. And you can find lots of free resources on the genuinelyyou.com website. You can find our books there, Rachel's books, The Point of Me and the Truth of Her. You'll find all of my books, including free copies of the latest bestseller, Thriving Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfillment. Thanks again for joining us. But if you are the victim or have been the victim of sexual abuse, please, please take this opportunity to take some action and let us know if you need some help. So thanks again, and we'll see you next week.